It's wild how some gear becomes legendary, right? Like almost mythical. We're talking about the Akai MPC.
Yeah.
For certain music producers, it's the holy grail.
Right.
And you've given us some really cool stuff to look at about these machines.
Yeah?
Both the old ones and the new ones. So let's get into it. What makes them so special?
Okay.
Especially, for producers still trying to catch that old school MPC sound.
It's not just nostalgia.
Right.
But that's definitely part of it. It's just there's something about how those older MPCs captured sound
Yeah.
and processed it that just clicked with certain genres.
Yeah.
Hip-hop, obviously,
Right.
electronic music.
So when we talk about that, that warmth, that grit,
Yeah.
what are we really talking about?
Yeah.
Is it like magic? Or is there something technical behind it?
No mythical creatures were harmed in the making of those sounds.
Okay, good.
Think about the tech back then.
Okay.
Those older MPCs, they had lower bit rates,
Yeah.
lower sampling rates compared to now. And you might think, lower quality? That sounds bad. But sometimes those limits, they made this really cool sound.
Interesting.
Almost distorted, but it worked.
It's like, I don't know, a chef who burns the edges of a dish on purpose.
Yes, exactly.
Like to get that smoky flavor. Like it's a flaw, but it's a good flaw. It adds something.
It's intentional. And it's funny because now people want to copy that. They'll take a super clean recording and intentionally degrade it just to get that old vibe.
Wow.
Think about that gritty drum sound in Lose Yourself by Eminem. That's that vintage sampling.
That's incredible that a specific sound becomes so tied to a whole genre.
Yeah.
But getting that sound, that's only part of it, right?
Right.
It's also how you use an MPC.
Yeah, definitely.
How it changes your workflow, how you make music. I mean, we're talking about going from basic screens to full-on touch screens.
Yeah.
How did that change how people use these things?
Oh, man, it's night and day with how you work.
Yeah.
Older MPCs, it was all about feeling it, touching it, hands-on.
Okay.
You want to change a filter, grab a knob. You want to trigger a sample, you hit that pad.
Direct, right there in the moment.
Exactly. Very in the moment.
But then tech takes a leap, and suddenly it's like we're piloting spaceships.
Right.
With these modern MPCs and their touch screens.
It's true. Those touchscreens, they change everything. It's not just tapping buttons now. You've got these visual displays of your sounds, your effects, everything. You can draw automation curves with your finger.
Wow.
The level of visual feedback, it's just different.
So we've got these two completely different ways of using the MPC.
Right.
But it makes me wonder, did that tactile limited thing with the old ones?
Yeah.
Did that actually make people more creative?
A lot of people ask that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good question. When you don't have a million options right in front of you.
Right.
Maybe you have to get more creative with what you do have,
You can't get lost in the weeds, tweaking every little thing.
Exactly. You've got to commit, make it happen with what you've got.
It's like they say, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Those limitations forced people to think differently.
Right. But then on the other hand,
Yeah.
those modern MPCs with the touchscreens and all that,
Yeah.
they just open up so many possibilities. You could edit stuff live, layer sounds in crazy ways you couldn't before.
And the speed.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be freeing for producers.
Totally. It's the difference between, I don't know, a sculptor with just a hammer and chisel
Okay, yeah.
versus one who's got a whole workshop full of power tools.
Right.
Both can make amazing art, but they're doing it so differently.
Totally. And the differences aren't just how you use them.
Right.
You talked about sound, workflow. But the tech itself is way more powerful now. Just think about how many tracks you get.
Oh, yeah.
That was crazy to me in the stuff you sent.
Yeah.
A few tracks on the vintage ones versus a zillion on the new ones.
Well, maybe not a zillion, but a lot. On an old MPC, you're working with 4 tracks, 8 max.
Wow.
And some absolute classics were made on even less.
Seriously.
But now, 1632, even more tracks sometimes, you can basically make a whole song right there in the machine.
I can't imagine making a hip-hop beat with only 4 tracks,
Yeah.
let alone a whole song.
It's amazing what those early producers did. But yeah, now you have space.
Right.
Space to breathe, try stuff out, build these huge layered tracks. Imagine trying to do an orchestral piece on an old MPC.
Oh, man.
It'd be tough. But on a modern one, totally doable.
So you've got all these tracks.
Right.
But then what about the sounds themselves?
Yes.
It's not just about how many tracks, but what you put on them. The sound libraries on the new ones must be crazy compared to back in the day.
Oh, yeah, it's night and day.
Yeah.
Like back then, you were limited to what you could make or find yourself. Producers would spend days digging through records to find that one perfect snare hit.
Oh, yeah. Crate digging, finding those gems.
Exactly. And there's magic in that, for sure. But imagine having thousands of drum sounds ready to go. Synth patches, loops, all right there. Plus, you can add your own samples, even use virtual instruments.
It's like an endless supply of sounds.
Pretty much.
So could you, like, make a whole album on a modern MPC without needing anything else?
You totally could. It's become its own studio. Which actually brings us to another big difference. Connectivity.
Right. Things have changed a lot there. We're not just talking standalone boxes anymore. It's like a whole web of possibilities.
Totally.
So how did those old MPCs talk to other gear anyway?
Basically, you had MIDI and like basic audio outputs.
And that means for those of us who don't speak fluent music tech.
Basically, your options were limited. You could sync up with keyboards or sequencers using MIDI. And then, you had audio outputs to send the sound out to a mixer.
Okay.
It was simple. Kept you focused, in a way.
And now?
Now, we've got USB, MIDI over USB, even CV Gate for the modular synth folks out there.
Okay, you lost me at CV Gate, but it sounds like a lot more options.
A lot more. Basically, a modern MPC can be the center of your whole studio.
Wow.
Talking to computers, synths, everything. It's not a self-contained box anymore. It's a hub.
So it's like technology's brought us back around.
Interesting.
Like vintage MPCs were their own thing, then computers and external gear took over. And now the new MPCs, they're putting it all back together.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think there's something to that. But at the end of the day, it's about giving musicians the tools to make stuff.
I like that. Okay, before we finish up with MPCs, there's this whole community thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned people keeping that old school MPC knowledge alive.
It's pretty cool, actually. There are these forums online where people still talk about these machines that are, like, older than they are.
Seriously?
Sharing workarounds, making sample packs, even modding the hardware.
It's like a classic car club, but for music gear.
Right.
Why do you think these old MPCs make people so dedicated?
Nostalgia's a part of it, for sure. But it's more than that. Though those old machines, they have character,
Yeah.
Like a quirkiness that newer stuff sometimes doesn't have. They're not just tools, they're like part of the creative process with you.
Right.
And when you find something like that, you want to tell people about it. Find other people who get it.
It's sharing that passion for the sound, for how it's made. And it's not just about keeping old tech alive, right? Because they're not making more of those vintage ones.
Exactly. That's why these communities are so important. Your vintage MPC breaks down. Good luck fixing it without those people who've seen it all.
Like digital archaeologists, keeping those sonic relics going.
I love that. And it's different from the community around the newer MPCs.
Oh, how so?
Well, people are still sharing tips and stuff. But Akai is making the new ones, supporting them. So it changes things.
So instead of needing help from each other, users can just go to Akai.
Yeah. You see a lot more tutorials, updates, all coming straight from the source. It creates a different vibe.
So it's less about keeping things the same, more about like, what can we do new with these?
Yeah. And that's exciting too.
Man, what a trip through MPC history.
Right.
Crunchy beats to touch screens to, it's amazing how much there is to talk about, from the tech stuff to the whole philosophy of making music.
Totally.
So for someone listening who's thinking, I need an MPC.
Yeah.
How do they even choose between these two totally different things?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And there's no right answer. It's all personal taste, how you work, what you're trying to make.
Okay, but let's say you're really feeling the vintage vibe.
Okay, yeah.
What should you think about before you jump in?
First off, you got to love that sound.
Yeah.
If those kind of gritty, punchy drums and samples are your thing, a vintage MPC might be perfect.
Right.
But you got to be okay with some limitations. The way those old ones work, it takes patience. You got to be willing to get in there and figure it out.
Like choosing between a film camera and a fancy digital one.
Exactly.
Both take amazing pictures, but it's a whole different experience.
Totally. Now, if you want flexibility, tons of sounds right at your fingertips. A modern MPC is probably better. The newest tools, easy to use with computers, virtual instruments, the whole deal.
And if you don't want to be on those forums all day troubleshooting, Akai's got your back.
Exactly. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can blend them.
Oh, how so?
Some producers, they love that old school sound, but they like how flexible modern stuff is.
Right.
So they use their vintage MPC, like a sound module, basically.
Oh, I see.
Trigger those classic sounds from a new setup. Best of both worlds.
I love that. The right tool for the job, no matter how old it is.